Hello, BookTube. All right, we're doing part 3 of my 12.6K Q&A, and we are up to Man Bro Joe Ho. Hello, Steve. Apologies for the barrage of questions. It does seem to be the norm this time around and every time around. Number 1, I recently bought a complete set of the Damiano trilogy by R.A. McAvoy. Do you have any opinions on it? Good Lord. I've praised it many times on this channel. It's fantastic. I'd love to know the edition that you got. Was it the old Science Fiction Book Club edition with the terrible, terrible, terrible cover art? Or was it maybe the one-volume mass-market paperback that came out in America? Or did you get all 3 of the individual paperbacks? Either way, you're in for a treat, a real treat. Number 2, what are your thoughts on Saul Friedlander's 2-volume history of Nazi Germany and the Jews? I love it. I think it's really, really good. Almost the final word. Number 3, who would you say is your favorite prose stylist in each respective language that you know? That is not a Q&A question. Not only can I not reel them off the top of my head, but it would require lots and lots of runners-up. Let's just move on. Number 4, how would you rank... These things never work. These things never work. They aren't suited for a Q&A. How would you rank M.R. James, Algernon Blackwood, Arthur Machen, William Hope Hodgson from worst to best? In what respect? In bed? I'm afraid I can only speak to 2 of those. Number 5, H.P. Lovecraft or Clark Ashton Smith? For what? A tennis partner? As writers, they both are pretty bad. Number 6, Robert E. Howard or Fritz Leiber? Oh, come on. Come on. First of all, it's apples and oranges. Second, Robert E. Howard was a pulp writer. Fritz Leiber is a great author of science fiction. There's no comparison in terms of quality. But I'm not saying that means I would pick one or the other. They're writing 2 completely different things. Thanks for alerting my attention to The Dragon Waiting by John Ford and Gnomon by Nick Harkaway. Your efforts are much appreciated. Boy, well, that's a thread running through these Q&As that I really like, is hearing that my recommendations are landing. Because they mean a lot to me. I care about my recommendations a lot. I care about all of the reading that you all do. As cheesy or corny as that sounds, you have a very limited amount of time to read compared to me. You've got lots of other things going on. Your reading time is incredibly precious to you and also hokey as it sounds to me. I want to make sure you have as few missteps and misfires, as few disappointments as possible. And I'm here for that. That's a large part of why I am here. Let's see here. Isaiah Armstrong, I'll move on to the next question before I have something in my eye. Isaiah Armstrong says, hello, Steve and Bean. What are your thoughts on the idea of marriage? Have you ever been married? Oh, God. If not, how come? Did you never find the right person? Are you against the idea of marriage? Well, no, I never found the right person. Instead, I found Deb over and over again. Every single time the whim struck, we would trot to the altar. But in terms of just in general, marriage as a concept in human society has always struck me as really, really strange. I've never understood it in any way. It is built to fail. It's either built to fail or it is built to enslave the woman in the marriage. How could it be otherwise? We're talking about a formal union between 2 members of a species that are always sexually active and that, thanks to an area right here, have the highest propensity for boredom of any animal on Earth. You put those 2 things together, and then you come up with an institution that says you're going to live with this one person. You're never going to have sex with anyone else for the rest of your life until you die. It's insane. It's absolutely insane. It's like it's a system that seems designed to fail, and I think that's why in the history of marriage it has mostly failed. The statistics that you hear all the time in in Newsweek articles in America is that somewhere between 50 and 60% of all marriages fail. I would say that if you broaden your definition of fail to induce misery, not divorce, but induce misery, then I would say that 80 or 90% of marriages fail. Most of them fail because whether or not they end in divorce, they almost always induce misery. And they wouldn't do that if it were just not this sacred cow. If it were just, I mean, I can understand a system where, all right, we're going to throw in our lot together. We really like each other. We also like having sex with each other. So we're going to throw in our lot together, and we want some sort of official governmental recognition of that so that we can get deals on the real estate market or tax breaks or the right to visit each other in the hospital if we're in extremis or whatnot. We want the state to recognize that. But they don't have to recognize. There's got to be a way to do it so they don't recognize it permanently, so that it's no big deal to end it just like it was to start it. That I'd be much more understanding of marriage if it were a lot closer to the experience of forming an LLC. It would make sense to me to do that. Otherwise, what are you asking the married people to do? You're asking them to do a lot of unrealistic things, in my opinion. But I am not the one to talk. Have you ever had the thought that your thousands of YouTube videos might outlast your online writings, especially since they are collected all in one place, unlike a lot of your written work? Could easily happen, although a lot of my writing, in fact, all of my writing is also online, and the internet never forgets. I've had some of you find pieces in the bowels of the internet that I thought were long, long ago. And also, some of my writing is blurbed under my name on the covers of books. Those are physical objects that are scattered all over the world in thousands of copies. So those will live. I don't know if you'll ever be able to go back and get the context. How many books do I have, collections of reviews, or even just other books that have a blurb on the back, and I think, gee, I really like that blurb. I try to find the piece, some Saturday Evening Post book review from 1941. Impossible to do. Long gone. Could be. Sic transit Gloria Mundi. I'm not here forever. Let's see here. Luke and Jennifer Higgins. How are we doing for time? Oh, we got plenty of time. Hi, Steve. A few questions to answer, please. Number one, do you enjoy the science fiction / fantasy works of Jack Vance? If so, what is your favorite? I do. Vance never turned down a paycheck. His answer was always yes. He was always typing furiously. That dilutes your legacy, and it dilutes the end product of what you do. So there are, I don't even know, 150, 170, 170,000 books that Jack Vance's name are on that aren't worth the paper they're printed on. But when he was good, he was really good. I love the Tales of the Dying Earth. And there was a beautiful trade paperback with beautiful cover artwork. And I don't say that often about American versions. About 30 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm sure that if you were to go to Google or eBay and type in Tales of Dying Earth, Jack Vance, it would come up. And you'll know right away which one I'm talking about because it's gorgeous. That doesn't have a bad page in it. So, number two, have you ever traced your family tree or had a DNA test done regarding your ethnic makeup, or is there no need due to it being 100% Irish? Well, I know that it's 100% Irish, going all the way back to, the Battle of the Boyne. But those tests can often reveal other things, too, like where that genetic trail wandered to. Did it go to North Africa? Did it go to Northern Europe or whatever? I've never done it, no. The old way of tracing your genealogy has had some appeal to me. It's a fantastic way, for instance, for people to learn how fascinating history is, because you're getting your hands-on experience. But the old-fashioned way was to set up correspondence rings with other experts in other places, swap genealogical information with someone who's maybe in the old parish back in Ireland, get the church books, get the city registers, that sort of thing, and do the research on your own to build a reliable family tree. I might have been interested in doing that. The modern version is deadly. I tell you people all the time, do not give up your data. Don't do it. Don't do it. There's no such thing as a trustworthy way to do that online. And some of those genetic ancestry sites, I'm sure you've seen the pop-up commercials for them online as well as I have. It's horrifying. You get, the actors playing the stereotypical grandma, or the two hipsters on the couch saying, "Wow, I had no idea grandmother was an abolitionist." What did you have to do to get that information from those companies? You had to give them everything. Absolutely everything. What do they do with that information? You think they're just going to delete it? They're not. They're not. Your information is currency. If you don't have control of it, someone else will have control of it. So as fascinating as the subject is, go to the church registers, talk with local experts. Giving all of your information, some of those sites even require pictures, to one of those companies, oh my God, I would never in a million years do that. Never. Neither should you. And you might say, when I go on that little rant, you might say, well, I can't imagine what use anyone would have for this information. That's the whole point, is that you can't imagine it. Anyway, number three, we live in a part of the nation that experiences severe thunderstorms as well as the occasional tornado. I used to live in such a part of the country. Amelia, oh, hello, Amelia, would like to know if you have any tornado or severe weather stories. Plenty of them. Plenty. If you were to come over here for wine and calzones, maybe not wine until you're a little older, but if you were to come over here and we were to tell stories, if I told you one severe weather story every day, you would be an old lady with frizzy gray hair by the time I finished. I have that many stories. You go out in the world, you're going to have stories like that. And also, if you spend a lot of time in Iowa, I spent a lot of time in the state of Iowa, and Iowa is popular with tornadoes. Let's see here. What is Frida's take on thunderstorms? She ignores them completely. I've had dogs that really, really noticed them, that really didn't like them. I've had some dogs that wanted to talk back to them, that wanted to bark or howl when that was happening. Frida doesn't care at all. Not in the slightest. She's not like my girls. The two dogs before Frida did not like thunderstorms until later in their life, very much later in their life, at the time when they show up on the videos on this channel. They couldn't hear anymore, so they didn't care. But when they were younger, they didn't like tornadoes. So with Frida's reaction, I have to go back to one of my earlier beagles. I think there are two people who watch this channel who remember the boy in question, who also just was completely indifferent to thunderstorms. No matter how violent they got, he didn't care at all. Let's see here. John Voto says, "Hi, Steve. Your recent Bro Watch video was excellent." Thank you. Another Bro Watch video has actually come onto my radar, and I am severely tempted to do another video, even though it's someone that I've brochetted before, who somehow did not shut down his channel, even though. Two questions. Do you have a favorite edition of Dracula? Well, favorite edition? My personal favorite is the old Magnum Easy Eye paperback, but not for any good reason. It's a terribly made product. It has no introduction, no notes, no nothing. It's just, but it has Bela Lugosi on the cover, and it was the edition that I read the hell out of when I was originally reading it. My favorite edition in terms of worth would be Leonard Wolfe's book, The Essential Dracula, which you should, if you are a Dracula fan, you should read it at all costs. It is amazing. Just amazing. I've shown it on this channel a million times, but it is amazing. Let's see here. What did you think of Frederick Lorgeval's first volume on John F. Kennedy? I liked it. There's a particular UK trade paperback of a young Kennedy on the cover that I would want if I saw it. But I only liked it. Every single anecdote, every single thing that he related, every single insight. All I could think everywhere in the book was just, okay, but I've read this same stuff a dozen times before. And it wasn't, I'd be okay with a biography of JFK that did that once in a while, but it was every time. Okay, you're grinding up the gears to tell this story about his time in Europe, or this story about PT-109, and I already know what you're going to do. Not only what you're going to consult to tell the story, but how you're going to tell the story and what notes you're going to draw from it. It was all that for me, the whole volume. I'll reserve judgment. I'll get that trade paperback of the first volume when it's time to read the second volume, and maybe I'll have a higher opinion. But this is a subject that I know really well. I would think that if it were well done, it would have jumped out at me. Ravens fan 1961 says, "Do you ever start books that you don't finish? If so, does it happen often?" Virtually never anymore. No, once upon a time I did, like everybody. But I read so fast. And now that I'm not working a job, now that I'm not in retail, it's all that I do. Aside from pampering Frida, it's all that I do. So I just can't. The combination of those two things, the hours that I have to devote to it and the speed that I do it, it just doesn't feel justifiable at all for me to just say, I'm done with this. I said I'll just finish it. I'll finish what the author wrote. And then at least I'll know what the author wrote. I mean, the rest of you, your reading time is far, far more valuable. I would say, a limited amount of DNFing, it would be good for that reading time. Let's see here. Treeforge says, "Do great works of fiction like Pride and Prejudice really point to any universal truths about human experience, or are they just stories that are meant to be entertaining? What do you think of people who, like me, who get envious of fictitious characters in these stories because their lives seem so much better than ours?" Right, well, Treeforge, the second question is easy. Keep in mind, everybody in Pride and Prejudice stank. Everybody did. They all stank. You wouldn't want to have been in a room with them. So the envy only goes so far. They all stank all the time. So I guess it's a harmless reflex, but I have certainly never felt it myself. But as to the first question, you say, Do they point to universal truths about human experience, or are they just stories that are meant to be entertaining? They can be both. They should be both. If you can draw plenty of lessons from Pride and Prejudice about human existence, but you can read it and love it without doing that at all. I do. It's maybe a reflection of all of the different layers that the author has carefully baked into the work, but you can definitely be both, or neither. Madman Gone Mad 2012 says, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, the book and the movies, which one did you enjoy the most? The first movie. Certainly not the second movie, right? Certainly not the second movie. If I want to see Johnny Depp cross-dress, there are YouTube channels for that. Let's see here. I'm certain you must have mentioned it once before, but on behalf of newcomers, what's the story behind that owl? This one up here. I have never mentioned the story. It's just a nice piece. I think it's just a simple, nice thing. I like to have paintings on the walls. I'm very Victorian in that regard. I like to have paintings on the walls. I don't like empty wall space, and I don't like tacking up posters. So when I'm at a Goodwill or a charity shop sometime, I always keep an eye out for framed pictures. The smaller and the handier, the better, because the space where you want a painting like that to just enliven a wall, the space for that is always relatively small. So you do the big paintings that you're tempted to do it at the Goodwill because it's big and it's beautiful, but it's $10. They end up needing more trouble than they're worth. Usually walls in apartments can't handle that. And it's God's own trouble to get back to the house, even before you get disappointed by the fact that you can't hang it. But there has no story other than that. I love owls, and it was right there. It was $2. Any thoughts on Harper Lee's Ghost Set of Watchmen? Quite a few. Yeah, lots and lots of thoughts on the method of its publication, also on the book itself. I think the more I think about it, the more I like the book itself. But I'm due for a reread, definitely. Jack O'Hara says, do you think our beloved Beta O'Rourke will win in November? Yes, I think he will win. If by win we mean he will get the votes. He will not be put in office. The votes will not be registered. The tallies will not be acknowledged. The opponent that he beats will take the job, even though that opponent lost. But in technical terms, on the technical area of your question, yes, I believe he will win. He just won't take the job. And if that is a weird, disjointed break for you, you should get used to it. Anyway, how did you manage the horrible catch-22 of leaving your dogs at home because you had to go out for work? Oh my God. Oh my God. Jack O'Hara. I could talk to you forever on this subject. It was brutal. Absolutely brutal. There were a whole bunch of things I didn't like about working a retail job. There were a whole bunch of things that I did. I worked in a bookstore for 25 years, and I wouldn't have kept doing that if there hadn't been something to it. Of course, there was this. I had regular conversations all the time. Fun, joking, book-related conversations all day long. But oh my, when I think of the list of things that I didn't like, I was technically outranked by a whole bunch of teenage morons. That could sometimes be really ugly, really bad. But the worst thing by far was that at 8:30 in the morning, I had to say to my dogs while I'm leaving. And I knew, but they didn't, that I was going to be gone for 10 hours. And sometimes those 10 hours, they were going to be completely alone in the apartment. So no ability to respond to noises outside, no ability to do anything to entertain yourself, no ability to get extra water or food if you've already gone through the amount that I left out, no ability to consult with me about anything. Knowing that was horrible. Absolutely horrible. And it got worse as the dogs I had would get older, where I knew they not only would need me during the day, but would need me, would want to be able to say something to me or to come and find me. That element is, what did you call it? The horrible catch-22. That is the foremost thing that I'm grateful for nowadays, is that I don't ever have to do that. I leave Frida once in a blue moon to do errands in the outside world, but I certainly don't leave her all day, every day. Oh my God. I hate even to think about it. I mean, I had friends at the time. I told them about it. I complained about it, and they said, you know, these dogs are still really happy. You're still doing right by them. You have to work. You have to make money. But still, oh my. Let's see here. Blue Laser Ryan, how are we doing for time? All right, we've got time for more. Number one, I have been reading the Leonardo da Vinci biography by Walter Isaacson. I also have the Michelangelo biography by Martin Gayford. Is the upcoming World of Art book on Raphael a good enough introduction / biography on the artist? Yes, very much so. I haven't been able to find a biography on Raphael in the same quality as the first two books. This one isn't. The World of Art book is not. It doesn't have the same kind of popular biography rumination style as the two that you mentioned. But it will do the trick. It's plenty good. Plenty good enough. Let's see here. Number two, what do you think of the books by Dan Carl, Mike Duncan, or Dan Jones? Well, this is a Q&A, right? Not a discussion video. I like all three of these authors. Mike Duncan especially, but what do I think about them? They do a good job, and the sort of covert mission that I think they're on, or that maybe their publisher is on, is to find that elusive gap, that elusive demographic of men who might be tempted into reading, because very few men do. And all three of these write great books for that. If you know, for instance, if you know a reluctant 18-year-old reader, man, a boy, pick one of these authors, especially Dan Jones or Mike Duncan. Dan Jones probably would be the best one, and just give them one of these books. It will almost certainly do the trick. Let's see here. And number three, when are we going to see Steve Donoghue on YouTube in 1080p, or are we going straight to 4K? Do you really want to see this in any greater definition? It's like that bit in The Simpsons where they say, keep slapping on Vaseline to the lens so that Homer can become palatable. Oh, let's see here. Baz Van Dyke says, hey, Steve, number one, what do you think of the famous movie reviewer Roger Ebert? I like him. I liked his work. Number two, I believe you have said that art can be judged objectively. What objective criteria do you use as a critic to judge if a book is good? Well, that's an hour-long discussion video, right? That's not. I can't just reel off a quick back-of-the-soup can list of things. But, I mean, that's a long video. It's not a Q&A type question, but it is true. If we're talking about a novel, well, what happens to the characters, what happens to the action, how believable the dialogue is, whether or not there's any good description, what happens to the plot. We know what a plot is, so what happens to it? There are objective assessments of whether or not that is done well, and it's no good an author getting up at the Cantab Lounge in a black turtleneck and saying, well, when I do it, those aren't the objective. You're not bigger than the game, Pete Rose. No, there's no good saying that. And the same thing even more so with nonfiction. Somebody writes a new 230-page book about the Battle of Iwo Jima. Well, objectively, there are all sorts of yardsticks to assess whether or not that is any good, whether or not the job they do is any good. One of them will be how much they know about all the other books on Iwo Jima. Another one will be how much they've consulted the original materials, that we know how we know anything about the Battle of Iwo Jima. You don't know about the Battle of Iwo Jima because John Toland wrote a book about it. You know because he read sources, or somebody did. So, a study of the bibliography, a study of the notes will be able to tell you a lot, objectively, about how good that book is. But also, nonfiction doesn't get off the hook for narrative skill. A lot of people think that it does, but it doesn't. Is the book poorly done? Is it poorly written? Is it boring? But there's a long, long subject there. Let's just move on. Number three, what are your thoughts on Tom Wolfe's The Bonfire of the Vanities? Well, it has its weaknesses, but I like it. It has its weaknesses, but at least the author cared about every single word that was in it. Which, as I said at the time, and as I've said since, is a rarity in the realms of contemporary literary fiction. That is a rarity, that an author cares about what they're doing. That's even more rampantly true, or not true, in the 21st century, when all the writers of contemporary literary fiction are not only entitled, but vengefully entitled. It's not just that they think they're Jesus come back to earth, it's that they'll sue you if you don't agree. And they've gone through writing workshops that have praised every bowel movement that they have. There's nothing like that in Tom Wolfe's fiction. Nothing. And that is something, and it's palpable, and I appreciate it. So I'm not saying that Bonfire of the Vanities is perfect. Man in Full is a whole lot stronger as a novel. And again, has a particular voice that is almost impossible to find in the ranks of contemporary literary fiction. Almost impossible. I would say definitely worth your time to try, I guess, is what I'm saying. Anthony Hodges says, having taken the advice of various Twitter experts, oh my, that's a bad idea, fly-by-nights and Seiko salesmen, I invested my fortune, made chiefly through modeling and cupcake sales. We got a live wire on the line here. Into cryptocurrencies. Oh no, that was a bad idea. Alas, that particular ship has now sailed into the Bermuda Triangle. Dreams of sharing cocktails with the rich and famous on board luxury yachts have sunk like a pair of concrete boots. Can you recommend any literary text that may console a poor little ne'er-do-well like myself? Thank you, my favorite bookworm. You should have come to me first before you tried cryptocurrency, before you tried to become a crypto bro. But if you need a particular kind of philosophical consolation, I would suggest The Consolation of Philosophy by Boethius. There's a particular Harvard University Press edition with some very nice blurbage. That might pick you up. How have we got room for time? Oh, we got time for one more. Let's. Helen Utzinger says, should I worry that reading historical fiction might skew my understanding of history, such as it is? No. No, why would you worry that? Examples I have in mind, Wolfe Hall, and what I'm currently reading, The World as I Found It. I keep thinking about silly cases, such as reading a particularly vivid fictional scene in which George Washington is wearing ruffled socks. You certainly wouldn't want to blurt that out in a history grad seminar. Is there any potential? Can you suggest a good, easy workaround? I am sure there is an element of this question that I'm not understanding. Why would you blurt that out? Why would you blurt it out without also blurting out that you read it in a novel? If you read it in a novel, something like that, and it struck an odd note, why wouldn't you immediately research to see whether or not it was true, so that you don't blurt it out at a seminar or anywhere else, without also blurting out that it's funny that the author thought it was true, if it's not? That's an element of this question that I'm not getting. I definitely... Reading historical fiction might skew your understanding of history? Why would it do that? They're two different things. We expect historical novelists to take liberties for dramatic effect. That's the whole point. That doesn't mean you believe the liberty. Are you asking, how do I tell the difference? If you're worried about coming anywhere near a history grad seminar, then you'll be reading history as well, right? Not just fiction. I know there's something here I'm not getting. We'll end on a confused note and move on to the next part.